Zelensky has ignored Vladimir Putin's latest warning and authorized a barrage of drone strikes deep into Russian territory. After announcing the capture of Kostiantynivka, Putin publicly cautioned Zelensky against what he called terrorist attacks. Ukraine has paid no heed to those warnings and instead fired waves of drones at some of Russia's biggest cities. Moscow and St. Petersburg have come under sustained attack, with blasts reported and fires breaking out at oil facilities. Putin has hinted that he may not only punish Ukraine but also target Zelensky's Western backers, suggesting that those who supply weapons and support Kyiv's operations could face consequences.
In addition, there should be a continued analysis of each instigator's involvement in prolonging the war in Ukraine. An analysis must be conducted on the engagement of each of them in actual hostilities. We need this analysis for making possible responsible decisions in the future.
Ukraine has launched a major counterattack on Russia, firing drones at both Moscow and St. Petersburg in coordinated strikes that underline Kyiv's growing ability to hit targets far beyond the front lines. Moscow's mayor said that more than 200 drones were fired at the capital over a 24-hour period, describing the assault as one of the most intense the city has faced since the start of Ukraine's deep strike campaign. Russian air defenses reportedly neutralized most of the drones at long range, with 62 devices destroyed on the way to Moscow, showcasing both the scale of the attack and the strain on Russia's air defense network. Authorities said no casualties or significant damage were reported in the capital, and emergency services were dispatched to all sites where debris fell, underscoring how Russia is trying to reassure residents amid repeated air raid scares. According to Russian estimates, the drone assault on Moscow ranks among the largest attacks on the city since 2024, marking a new peak in Ukraine's campaign to keep pressure on the Russian leadership. In St. Petersburg, an overnight drone attack appeared to target an oil terminal, indicating that Ukraine is focusing not just on symbolic city centers, but also on fuel infrastructure that feeds Russia's war machine. The city's governor reported that a total of 72 drones were intercepted over St. Petersburg, highlighting the sheer number of incoming threats and the growing intensity of air defense operations there. Officials said there were no casualties in St. Petersburg and that the aftermath of the attack had been dealt with, suggesting that damage was contained even as anxiety among residents continues to rise. Debris from one drone reportedly fell in the suburb of Peterhof, an area famous for its palaces and UNESCO World Heritage Site, raising fears about the risks such strikes pose to historic landmarks as well as modern infrastructure. Zelensky said Ukrainian forces also hit military targets in nearby Kronstadt, pointing to expanding operations against bases and installations that support Russia's naval and air capabilities. Social media videos showed thick black plumes of smoke and flames rising from St. Petersburg's port area, giving visual confirmation of damage and fueling speculation about the scale of the disruption to oil and fuel storage tanks. That port zone is home to one of Russia's largest fuel storage and export hubs, meaning any successful hit there could have serious implications for the country's energy exports and military logistics. Russian media reported that explosions were heard in St. Petersburg around 6:30 a.m. local time, indicating that the overnight strikes continued into the early morning and caught many residents off guard. Officials also said dozens of drones were shot down over the wider Leningrad Oblast, showing that the attack covered a broad geographic area and not just the immediate urban core of the city. Meanwhile, in Belgorod, a woman was killed in a missile strike on July 3rd, underscoring the human cost of continued cross-border attacks and the vulnerability of civilians living near the frontiers. Russian officials claim that, overall, air defenses intercepted 389 Ukrainian drones across multiple regions, reflecting the scale of Kyiv's latest wave of strikes and the pressure being placed on Russia's anti-air systems. These Ukrainian attacks came just hours after Vladimir Putin announced the capture of Kostiantynivka, suggesting that Kyiv is using long-range strikes as a direct response to battlefield setbacks. During his briefing, Putin warned that Kyiv might resort to terrorist actions after losing ground, accusing Ukraine of trying to compensate for failures at the front by hitting Russia's cities and infrastructure. He added that any attacks on civilian sites would only force Moscow to increase pressure on Kyiv, hinting at the possibility of harsher reprisals and a further escalation of strikes against Ukrainian territory.
What I'd like to point out is that the more strikes the enemy attempts to launch against our civilian facilities, and of course, we must first and foremost do everything necessary to protect these facilities and defend civilians. But the more attempts the enemy makes of this kind, the bigger the security zone we will need to create in the surrounding territory. Especially since, just like the other territories we're discussing today, this is historically Russian land. In addition, there should be a continued analysis of each instigator's involvement in prolonging the war in Ukraine. An analysis must be conducted on the engagement of each of them in actual hostilities. We need this analysis for making possible responsible decisions in the future. In any case, it could be necessary.
Russia claims its forces have captured the Ukrainian town of Kostiantynivka, with troops raising Russian flags across the area. Moscow says its troops are consolidating newly captured positions as military operations continue along the Eastern Front. Following the reported advance, Russia launched a new wave of missile, drone, and guided bomb attacks across Ukraine. Russian forces dropped 6 guided aerial bombs on central Sumy, striking a densely populated residential neighborhood. At least 4 people, including a 5-year-old girl, were killed in the devastating attack on Sumy on July 3rd. More than 20 people, including several children, were injured as rescue workers searched through the rubble. Ukrainian officials say apartment buildings, shops, and other civilian structures suffered extensive damage in the strike. President Zelensky accused Russia of deliberately targeting civilians in the heart of the city. Authorities warned that more people could still be trapped beneath the collapsed buildings as rescue operations continue. Russian strikes also hit Zaporizhia, setting a 9-story residential building on fire. At least 2 people were killed, while dozens of residents were evacuated from the heavily damaged building. Firefighters battled the flames as rescue teams searched through the destruction for survivors. The latest attacks came just days after Russia's massive barrage on Kyiv left dozens dead. Kyiv says Moscow is combining battlefield offensives with long-range strikes in an effort to weaken Ukraine's defenses. Ukrainian officials warn that Russia's aerial campaign continues to intensify as the fighting spreads across the country.
I would like to note the positive dynamics in the actions of our troops, the increasing pace of the offensive of the Union and military units of the Russian armed forces along the entire front line. I see this in your reports and in the reports of other commanders in the daily regime. In the last few months, the security lines in our border areas with Ukraine have been significantly expanded. The troops of the Vostok, Dnieper, and Donetsk People's Republics and the troops of the southern group of troops and the central group of troops continue to move to the west. In June, the units of the Russian armed forces were knocked out of 6 settlements, including the Russian control over the city of Constantinfka. I would like to note that the capture of Kostiantynivka is only the first but very important stage in the destruction and formation of the Ukrainian armed forces, which is still holding the Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, and Kostiantynivka strongholds, as you said, where the enemy has shot a deep and well-defined system of fortifications, turning the cities of Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, Druzhkivka, and Kostiantynivka into a single defense unit. But with the capture of Constantinfka, we are not talking about the Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, and Constantinfka, but about the Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, and Druzhkivka strongholds. I mean, of course, the small settlement of Constantinfka and the fortified city of Druzhkivka. Sergei Viktorovich, am I right?
Yes, you are.
What is the situation in Constantinfka now, and how is the situation and the responsibility of the southern group of troops developing in general?
Comrade Supreme Commander-in-Chief, the southern group of troops continues to carry out tasks in the North Donetsk region in accordance with the plan of a special military operation. The offensive of the military units of the group is carried out along the entire line of combat contact on the wide front. In December of last year, Comrade Supreme Commander-in-Chief, we have already reported to you about the capture of the settlement of Seversk in the Slavyansk direction. As of today, the Union of the Third Army continues to carry out offensive actions. 23 settlements have been liberated, including 4 in June. These are the settlements of Ryalexandrovka, Peskanovka, Yurikovka, and Malinovka.
Sergei Viktorovich, how much time has passed from Seversk at the moment?
From Seversk, Comrade Supreme Commander-in-Chief, the Union of the Third Army has advanced by 22 kilometers.
How far is it to Slavyansk?
8. The front assault units of the Third Army carry out the task 8 kilometers from the settlement of Slavyansk.
Nevertheless, I want to convey the best words of gratitude and wishes to all the soldiers and commanders of the Third Army under the leadership of General Kadyrov-Tsev. Thank you.
It will be done. On the Kramatorsk-Druzhkovka and Alexandro-Kalinovka directions, units of the 6th Motorized Rifle Division of the 3rd Army Corps, the 4th Motorized Rifle Brigade, in coordination with units of the 103rd Motorized Rifle Regiment of the 150th Motorized Rifle Division, have completed the liberation of the town of Constantinfka. At present, the 6th Motorized Rifle Division, operating along the Kramatorsk-Druzhkovka axis, is advancing towards Druzhkovka. Forward assault groups are already engaged in combat on the southern outskirts of Alexeyevo-Druzhkovka. In the town of Constantinfka itself, Comrade Supreme Commander-in-Chief, operations are underway to clear the city's neighborhoods of small, scattered enemy groups still hiding in the town cellars. Comrade Supreme Commander-in-Chief, during the liberation of Constantinfka, the military units and subunits of the 4th Separate Motorized Rifle Brigade under the command of Major General Anton Felixovich Grunis, and the 6th Motorized Rifle Division under the command of Colonel Alexander Viktorovich Katakin, were the most successful.
Comrade Commander-in-Chief, the 4th Motorized Rifle Brigade during the fighting in Constantinfka advanced to the left side of the city. On the approach to the city and directly to Constantinfka, the enemy prepared 4 defense lines, which represented a system of concrete fortifications. According to the Command and Security Services of Ukraine, almost impenetrable defense was created here. At the first stage, sneaking through small groups and accumulating in the enemy's ranks, as well as bypassing the city of Flanders, we managed to overcome the defensive positions and blockade part of the forces. From that moment on, the organized defense of the city was practically violated. Later, advancing in a straight line with equal directions, in cooperation with the units of the 6th Motorized Rifle Division and the 103rd Motorized Rifle Regiment, the enemy's leadership was divided into separate branches, which were destroyed in sequence. Part of the enemy's forces was in a defensive position. At the moment, the city is under our control. At the same time, we are completing the search for the liquidation of single servicemen of the armed forces of Ukraine, trying to hide in the buildings, basements, and numerous buildings. During the occupation of the city, the most distinguished servicemen, reconnaissance units, and a separate assault squad, the 1st Battalion of the 1194th, the 1st Battalion of the 1465th and the 2nd Battalion of the 78th Motorized Rifle Regiment were deployed. Comrade Commander-in-Chief, the units of the brigade continue to carry out the main tasks. The report is finished.